Hello everyone. Welcome to the Lifecycle Institute's Impact webinar, 6 Tips for Driving Results with Effective Communication. Before we get started, if you have any questions for the presenter about the topic, please use the chat window to type in your questions. Be sure to select all participants so everyone can view your questions. If you have any technical questions or difficulty, use the chat drop-down list to send your message directly to the Lifecycle Institute. You can see the chat window on the bottom right corner of your screen. Your speaker today is Sherry Large, Business Manager for the Lifecycle Institute and ProSci Certified Change Management Professional. Without further delay, I will now turn it over to Sherry.
Thanks, Tara, and thank you so much for joining me today. Today we're going to talk about how we can drive results using effective communication. And notice I use the term effective communication and not just communication. That's because not all communication is effective, which is what we're going to talk about during today's webinar. And before we get started, I do encourage you to take out a piece of paper if you have one handy and start making a checklist, because some of the tips that I'm going to go through and some of the communication elements may be something you want to take note of. When changes take place within an organization, it is very important that the employees who are effective be told about those changes. Now, sometimes it can be a small change, like your inter-office mailbox has been moved down the hall, or sometimes it can be a really big change that's going to drastically affect the way you do your job. This can be something like a new departmental partnership or a major process change. And I'm sure that one time or another, most of us have kind of sat at work scratching our heads thinking, I didn't know we were doing that. When did that happen? If only somebody had told you that your expense reports go to Sally instead of Jen, or maybe you knew about the new computer system but didn't really understand the importance of starting it right away. So these are some of the things that we're going to go through today and how we can avoid some of these pitfalls of communication where changes are concerned. And before we really get into the 6 tips, I want to go over some basic elements of communication and also look at some of the implications of ineffective communication. And now, some of these basic elements are ones that you've probably seen several times, but I do want to reinforce them because they are important anytime we're communicating a change. We want to be sure that we're taking into account the frequency of our communications. Are we communicating frequently enough for our audience? Is the sender of the communication credible? Is this the right person to send the message? What about the receivers of the message? Who's our audience and how do we need to speak to them? Which is then going to mold the content of the communication. And then going into the vehicle, how are we going to transmit these messages about the change to the audience? Are we going to use email? Are we going to use a face-to-face meeting? Is it going to be more of a group meeting? So these are things that have to be determined. Also, feedback is very important. We need to know that our communication is effective and that it's getting to the people that really need to hear it. And then finally, noise is going to be anything that gets in the way of our communication getting to our audience. This can be anything from an employee being absent the day of a meeting, or it could mean that maybe there was some kind of big fire that had to be put out at work and people were busy and they weren't able to really pay attention to the information that you were putting out there. And because communication is so complex and it is so important, I always have this checklist kind of in the back of my head of things that I check for when I send out a communication. These are the who, what, where, when, why, and how, the 5 W's and the H. Anytime I send out anything of importance, I always double check to make sure of whether or not I should have these elements in there, and if I should, I make sure that they're present. And I sometimes check it 2 or 3 times. I might have somebody else follow back behind me and check it, just because certain things are so important and we don't want to leave out a big piece of the puzzle, because a lot of times we are so familiar with the change and what's going on that we tend to kind of fill in the blanks and our minds just kind of do the work for us instead of really realizing that we need to put something else in there. And ineffective communication can really put a damper on changes and new processes and projects that we're working on. And some of those effects of ineffective communication could be things like employees who are just plain uninformed, they don't really know what's going on, or they don't know the full extent of what's going on. Maybe they're not aware of how it's going to affect them and why it's important. Also, this could lead to very unclear objectives. This can delay the start of some projects or some implementations, and it can also increase our costs, not only just monetary costs, but also in time. And what I want to show you now is on our website, we've got this really cool calculator, and this helps us determine how much money we're losing or not saving as a result of changes that aren't implemented properly. And a lot of those really result from communication and the fact that we're not communicating something very well. So I'm just going to give an example. Let's say we've got a software implementation. This is a new inventory management system, or maybe it's a new process that we're putting into place. And we've got about 50 people in our department who are going to be affected by this new process. And as a result of this new process, we're supposed to be saving about 2 hours a day on processing, and this is going to free up 2 hours for us to be able to do other things. So in a week's time, we'll say 5 days, and then we're going to say that for this particular department, these employees, they cost us about $30 an hour. This is, including what we pay them on top of benefits and their space in the building, all of that. So we're going to take that into consideration. And let's say with this particular process, we've let people know about it, but we didn't really tell them how important it was to go ahead and get started using this process right away. So they got started about a week late. So that goes back to what I just showed you with the delayed project start. And you may think, well, okay, just a week late, that's no big deal, it's just a week. Well, this week cost you $15,000. Imagine if you had a department of not 50 people, but 500 people. That cost you $150,000. So these are the terms that you need to be thinking of as far as results go, and the importance of really having effective communication. And I do encourage you all to check that out on our website. That is a calculator that's available, and I'm going to have Michelle put that in the chat, which I think she's already done. So you can go to that link. I'd prefer that you do it after the webinar. but that is on our website under our change management section. We have a special page dedicated to project management, and it's about 3/4 the way down on that page. So I encourage you to check that out with something that may have gone on in your organization or maybe is currently happening. Okay, so over the next 20 minutes or so, we're going to dig into Sherry's 6 tips. The first tip that I have for you today is that one size does not fit all. This is concerning both the audience and the vehicle that we use to transmit our communication. Now, when we talk about the audience, change affects people in different ways. So we may have different stakeholder groups who are going to be affected differently for the same change. Accounting may be affected one way, customer service may be affected a different way. So we need to tailor our messages to meet the needs of the audience. I have an example for you. I just recently completed a project on competitive analysis, and there were really 2 main stakeholder groups. One was our business development group, and then one was our business unit. And the business development group, their main stake in the project was that they wanted this clearly defined process on how we were going to go about analyzing and gathering competitive intelligence. And the business unit, they were really more concerned with, well, what did you find out about these companies and what do I need to do from here? So when it came time to present the results, instead of having one meeting with both groups where I went over all the information, I ended up having 2 separate meetings with just the information tailored for each group. If I had done it all at one time, then at any given time during the presentation, there would have been half the room that was completely tuned out because what I was saying wasn't going to be relevant to them. So while it took some extra time and some extra effort, it was a lot more effective for me to communicate those results of that project. And then the vehicle that we use to communicate is also very important. The same way that we can't reach everyone, we can't talk to everybody in the same way, we also can't reach everybody in the same way. So when we have employees who are out in the field or on the plant floor, they may not have the same access to email and the company intranet that other people do who have more of a desk job. So we may have to reach them differently. And we also might have employees who travel quite a bit. So if you have an announcement on the bulletin board by the coffee machine, they may not see that, so you may have to communicate to them differently. And face-to-face is considered the richest form of communication, and it is also the most preferred, especially when you're talking about major changes that are happening. But sometimes it may not be the most practical, so we do need to make sure that we figure out what the most efficient, effective, and practical means of communication is for the change in the project that we have going on. And along the same lines with the communication vehicle, right now, I mean, a lot of people are doing the jobs of 2 to 3 people, especially now that we're kind of getting back into the swing of things. Things are getting a little bit better with the economy, but there was a time when there were a lot of layoffs and people really had to step up and do multiple jobs. So we're still experiencing that. So as a result, people have a lot heavier workload than they used to. And this means a lot more stuff coming their way. So they may not be able to pay as much attention to something that the company sends out, any kind of communication, as they used to. So if you're sending out a pretty lengthy email detailing all the steps that are going on in this new initiative that the company is doing, you're going to have to send it a couple different times and in a couple different ways in order for it to really be heard. And right now, too, there's a lot of desensitization to email. People are kind of desensitized to it now. And I'm not bashing email. I like email, and I do it all the time. But there is a point where people just tend to not weight email messages as heavily as some other forms of communication. And what I want to do before we go into the second tip is to open up a quick poll. And let me do that right now. And there's a couple different questions here that I want to find out from the group. The first one is, which vehicle do you prefer for receiving communications about important changes that happen at work? And then the second question is, if you're a manager or someone who has to communicate to people about a change, how do you typically communicate with employees about an important change that's going on at work? So we'll leave this open for a little bit and give you guys a chance to answer, and that way we can see what people prefer as their method of communication, and then what people are actually doing for means of communication. And it may not always be the same thing, so that'll be interesting to see these results come through. Okay, so we'll give the poll just another minute or so. And while we're waiting on some of those results to come through, I'll get started on the second tip here, which is to spice it up. And what I mean by that is when we have, and this poll looks like it's calculating for us, when we have internal communication, it seems to be a little bit dry, especially when we compare it to external messages that our company might send out. So if we can, whatever we can do to kind of make those messages more interesting and make them kind of stand out, the better off we're going to be as far as getting our messages heard. Okay, it looks like those poll results just came up, so let's take a look at those real quick. Okay, so for which vehicle do you prefer? Group meeting and face-to-face was kind of even there, pretty close. And then how do you typically send out information? Face-to-face was definitely the winner on that one. So it looks like people really are practicing what they preach, and they're actually giving out the information in ways that they want to receive the information. So that's great. Okay. All right, so back to the second tip, spice it up. We were talking about being creative. And we mentioned earlier about how employees are just so busy right now, and there's so many things going on. When you think about the external world outside of work, I think it is said now that the average person receives about 5,000 marketing messages a day. At work, it's definitely lower, but I mean, we still have messages coming our way. It may not be marketing type of messages, but we have emails, we have people stopping us in the hall, we have people, our boss coming by, we have our day-to-day things that we do. So when we're communicating internally to our employees, anything that we can do to kind of get their attention is going to be better off for our results for our change project. And, for example, if HR has a new process in place, would you pay more attention to them sticking a little note in your inter-office mailbox or sending you a quick email, or would you pay more attention to them coming around with a cart full of cookies along with a note saying what the new process is? So things like that can really get people's attention and really help your efforts. And another way to spice it up would be to use some visual communication. A lot of times we talk about change in terms of results and what the change is going to end up doing for us. And sometimes people don't always, it doesn't always resonate well with them. So if we can create a chart or a graph or something that shows us, well, this is how much more profitable we're going to be, and this is how much time we're going to save, and these are really the results that we're going to get, that may have a heavier impact. The third tip is to make communication a priority. The tendency when we have a big change initiative coming on or a big project is to think about all the project tasks that we have to do and not really the communication piece. Sometimes that tends to be a little bit of an afterthought, which can cause some trouble, because when people know that there is change coming, or they know that there's a big project underway, people start talking. And once this rumor mill gets started, it's really hard to rope people back into reality. I have an example from a training class that I attended last summer, and the guy in the training class, he was talking about how one morning his wife and him were sitting down to breakfast, and she was looking online at some news and noticed that there was something on there about his company actually being purchased by another company. So she says to him, "Hey, did you know about this?" He had no idea. And going into work that morning, he had all these questions going through his head. Everybody at work that morning was going, "Well, what's going on? We didn't hear anything about this." And in all the daily grind of getting things done and getting the approval of upper management and stockholders, the company had failed to alert their own employees before alerting the media on what was going on. And kind of an opposite of that, Zappos did a really good job when they were purchased by Amazon of letting their employees know what was going on. They created several different vehicles of communication, videos, emails, all kinds of stuff to really get the word out to their employees and explain why it was happening and how it was going to affect them. And being deliberate in our communication can really go a long way. Know what you need to say, and don't assume that people are going to put the pieces together. Because a lot of times we tend to send out the information thinking, well, they'll understand why we're doing this, and maybe they won't understand. Maybe they have a different take on it, or maybe they understand why, but they don't really understand how they're going to be effective. So being as deliberate as we can with our communications and sending them out, as frequently as is necessary, and making sure that we're telling people what their roles and responsibilities are and really laying it all out for them. Which brings us to the fourth tip, which is planning the communication. And this is something that I'm sure you all know that we're supposed to be doing when we have a change or we have a big project, that we're supposed to let people know about it. But sometimes it's not always so easy to get started with it. So I always recommend using a checklist or a template, which hopefully you're creating as we go along with some of these tips today. That can really help simplify some things. I know my husband laughs at me because when I go to the grocery store, if I need 5 or 6 things, I'm making a list for it. And I don't know, maybe I'm just forgetful, but if I don't make the list, you get distracted, and there's other things that are going on, and stuff like that can just get in the way of the main goal. So using those checklists and templates can really be helpful and really simplify some things when it comes to communication. And planning the communication can also lead to consistency. Departments and managers sometimes in different departments, they're going to be sending out different messages, but they should really have the same theme. Of course, they're going to be tailored to the audience like we talked about earlier, but really having that consistent message in them is going to be important, and that's only going to come from planning. You can't just expect to send out a consistent message of someone else if it's not talked about before. And even a slight difference in wording can really change the meaning or the perception of a communication. So it's really important to have that consistency. And then the third point I want to make about planning communication is goals and objectives. Build a communications plan based on what the goals and objectives of the project are. So know what the goals of the project are and say, well, this is what we need to communicate to make sure that these goals are achieved. Map out who you want to communicate with, who's going to be responsible for those communications, who they're going to come from, what you're going to communicate, who you're communicating to, and how you're communicating and how often. And that's going to help you always link back to those goals and make sure that those are planned in advance. Okay, and the fifth point that I want to make today is craft your messages carefully. Sometimes we get messages from our employers or from a coworker that just plain don't make sense, or they may lack information, or maybe they're a little insensitive. So I put out here a couple funny or maybe not so funny quotes. The first one was from former President Bush back in 2000 during a campaign event right here in our state, South Carolina. And he made the mistake of saying, rarely is the question asked, is our children learning? So here he is out trying to promote education, and he has this slip, which, mistakes happen, but it does change the perception of what you're trying to put out there, and it kind of gives people this, just kind of a bad taste about what your initiative is. And the second one here, the BP CEO after the oil spill disaster, saying, I want my life back, and this has been in the media quite a bit, and I think his intentions were good. I think he was really trying to relate to some of the other people whose lives have really been turned upside down, as was his, but the way it came across was very insensitive and just not very well thought out. So this was something that probably wasn't too carefully crafted. So sometimes when we get messages about a change, we tend to have more questions than answers. Which usually doesn't leave us feeling too good. So the more information that we can put in about how people are being affected by the change and how their job is going to be different is going to help to answer some of these questions up front. And I always will go back to the 5 W's and the H, the who, what, where, when, why, and how. This really helps to provide that checklist for us to make sure we're sending out all the information that we need to send out and getting our point across so that we can really achieve the results. Going back again to the goals and objectives for the change. And the why is really important. This really puts the change into perspective, and it can help build coalitions for your change. We don't really want to say, well, because I said so, this is why we're doing the change. That doesn't really go over too well, and it doesn't give people the information to really get on board with what you're doing. The answer to the question why can really give them a compelling reason to have that desire to want to change. And again, when we don't craft our messages carefully, going back to what I talked about in the beginning with some of the effects of ineffective communication, we talked about delayed starts, we talked about unclear objectives and potential monetary losses. So these are things that we should always be thinking about when we're thinking about communication and really realizing how important it is. And my final tip of the day is to measure the effectiveness of the communication. One way of doing that is going to be by polling your employees, finding out really what they know and how much they know, and if they're really getting the information that you're trying to get to them. Monitoring the feedback. Anytime you announce something that's going to mean the employees are going to do something different, you're probably going to get some feedback, sometimes positive, sometimes negative, but really monitoring the type of feedback that you're getting can really help shape your future communication efforts and what you might need to change or what you might need to continue doing well. And finally, on the evaluation part, what are people asking? What kind of questions are you getting back? If you're getting a lot of the same questions, this might mean that you really need to clarify some of your communications. Maybe you need to use a different form of communication. Maybe there's if there's a change for benefits or something like that within HR, maybe you need to have a meeting so people can actually ask these questions face to face. And maybe there's just some additional information that you need to give them up front about the change. And ask for help. Don't be afraid to ask for help if communication really isn't your thing, or if you don't think you're going to have time for it. Even the world's top leaders have writers. So anytime you think that you might need a little bit of assistance with that, with the communication part of it, go back to your checklist, go back to a template. There's lots of different templates online that you can find about communicating, and those are definitely going to help you out as you go forward with your change initiatives. And before we leave today, I'll just do a quick recap. The first thing, to make a checklist. Remember what I showed you in the beginning with the communication frequency, the sender of the message, who's going to receive the message, what's the content, how are you going to send it out. How are you going to monitor feedback? And always expect noise or barriers of your communication getting to really where you want it to go. Think of communication in terms of results. How much money can I save by communicating better? So go back to that calculator that I showed you in the beginning that Michelle put up a link to, and really think, well, gosh, if this project gets a little bit off track and we start a little bit later and people don't adopt this new way of doing things right away, how much money could I have saved that I'm not saving right now? Tailor your messages depending on the audience. Change the vehicle to match the audience and the message. Spice it up. Think of some creative ways that you can communicate with your employees to really cut through the clutter of their day-to-day activities. Make communication a priority. You have to tell people what they need to know. You cannot expect them to seek out the information. Everybody's busy, so you really need to lay it out for them. What are their roles? What are their responsibilities? Devise a plan for your communications. Craft your messages very carefully. Pay attention to what you're saying. Check your checklist for the 5 W's and the H. Predict what the implications of not communicating effectively might be. And then again, always measure your communication effectiveness. Try to figure out, are you lacking? Are you doing something really well? What's working? And then finally, ask for help if you need it. I hope you were able to take away some really useful information from today's webinar. Now we'll open it up for some questions, and you can just chat those in using the chat function. And while we're waiting for some questions to come through, I'll turn it back over to Tara, who's going to have a few announcements for us.
Thank you, Sherry. As Sherry said, if you have any questions, please use the chat function. And upcoming events, it may take just a moment for the slide to come up on your screen. We have a workshop with Ron Moore on reliability and operations excellence. That is going to be here in Charleston, September 13th through 14th, and I believe there are only a few seats left. So please register at education@lce.com about Ron Moore's upcoming workshop. We're very excited about that. Maintenance planning and scheduling is also here in Charleston, August 8th through the 12th. Reliability Excellence for Managers. This is our flagship course. It's a 4-session course that is spread out over a year. A new series begins August 16th through 18th. So email education@lce.com if you would like to join that new set of students and a new session of that class. And a Train the Trainer course. That will be held October 11th through the 13th, also here in Charleston, South Carolina. I will check the chat box. We do not have any questions at this time. The upcoming webinar will be announced soon in the next issue of Impact. But thank you all for attending today's webinar. You can expect to receive an email in the next few days with a link to the webinar recording. Since we have no questions at this time, oh wait, we might have one coming in the Q&A. What are your recommendations, about media to use for communication about project implementation?
Okay. Well, I'm assuming you're talking about media that you would use, within the organization. So for project implementation, I guess it depends on how widespread you want the communication to be. But there's several different things like company intranet. Some people use, company blogs that are effective in some organizations. So it's really going to depend on the culture of your organization. I know in smaller organizations, maybe just a quick meeting would be more efficient. And then in larger organizations where people are more spread out, maybe doing something like what we're doing today and doing a webinar, that might be a good way to do it. There's some conference calling and video conference calling websites out there, so that may be something to take advantage of as well.
And I think that was our last question.
Okay.
So with no further ado, thank everyone for attending. Again, you will receive an email in the next few days with a link to this recording. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you. And we'll also include in that email a link to that calculator on our website in case you didn't get it from the chat, and that way you can reference that as well. So have a great day.
Great.